I would like to start by thanking KISA for this invitation, because it's a real privilege to be part of this very interesting conference and also a very progressive research project that is actually at the cutting edge of social science research in terms of involving the subjects in attempts to understand. A few years ago, I gave a presentation on multiculturalism in the Greek Cypriot educational system to a group of student teachers. At the end of the presentation, a student stood up and exclaimed before leaving the room. He said, "Here in Cyprus, we have a historical right to be racist." This is certainly, I know, an interesting way of using the concept of rights and the concept of racism in the same sentence and end up with a totally convoluted message on how one relates to the other. Some of the racist rhetoric we hear these days reflects this phenomenon. Everyone feels oppressed. Even the people who, sociologically, based on research, belong to groups that are afforded with more opportunities in society, feel that they are sidelined and believe they have the right to deny other people's rights. The concept of racism has almost lost its meaning, having been appropriated by a variety of different groups. As a result, we have more and more difficulty addressing this issue in education because of conflicting demands and declarations. In the next few minutes, I will attempt to do two things. First, outline some of the problematic ways in which the educational system perpetuates discrimination, and second, present the learning community's model, an approach to education that transforms schools by using what is normally thought of as an obstacle in education into a resource and a strength. Here I follow Freire's call for utopian education that involves both the denunciation of dehumanizing structures and practices along with the annunciation of ways to transform them. One has to do both, and I realize that the academic world has been guilty of overindulging in a line of work that ends with analysis and deconstruction, but not with real-life solutions. Certainly, I believe that the value of projects such as this one, Abuse No More, is the fact that it managed to both denounce violence, abuse, and marginalization, while at the same time identifying ways to overcome them. The first problem in most educational systems today is what I would call reduction. This refers to the fact that many well-intentioned anti-racist programs have ended up reducing racism to black and white in ways that ignore the diversity of experience within each group and actually reify the social construct of race as a meaningful category of physical and biological characteristics, thus exacerbating the very problem they aim to resolve. Here, I want to use Ramon Fletcher's distinction between what he calls modern and postmodern racism. Modern racism is the most easily detectable form of racism that explains social inequality through the genetic characteristics of different racial groups. Thus, school failure, poverty, and crime are more prominent in certain groups because they have a natural tendency to be slow, lazy, and immoral. But, as Fletcher argues, this rhetoric, although present in the declarations of many extreme right-wing groups, is less common today because it is less acceptable, even though that's starting not to be true anymore. We have now moved to postmodern racism that replaces the idea of hierarchy of races with the concept of excessive cultural relativism. All cultures are different, none is superior, thus we should not try to impose any type of Western values to those cultures. Recognition and defense of difference, however, may come in the form of abdicating responsibility to honor human rights, such as when Judith Oakley pointed out about literacy in Roma people. She said, illiteracy for Roma people, far from being an inevitable handicap, is in many aspects an element of freedom. The problem here is that Oakley does not mention the demands of every Roma association in the world to reduce illiteracy and dropout rate of the Roma student body. All too easily, educators can say, these students are just not interested in learning. It's not in their culture. They are too religious. We just need to let them be. This type of benign racism, the one that starts with good intentions, is very common today and is often accompanied by a type of openness to to other cultures that is expressed in the form of tasting their food and dancing their songs. More importantly, however, this monolithic approach to culture leaves no room for intersectional approaches. And I was very happy to see that the Abuse No More project actually does bring an intersectional perspective into this. I will leave out the theoretical aspect of this and just explain that what we need by intersectionality is that educational systems need to understand that the challenges faced by a female migrant student from Syria may be different or are different from the challenges from a male migrant student from Bulgaria, for example. And this leads me to the third and final point I would like to address, which is the dominance of research about bullying in schools. And let me start by giving out a disclaimer. I believe that the research on bullying has shed light to a very important dimension of school life, one that we all recognize as central to a child's welfare. We have either all experienced bullying or we have witnessed bullying in our school years. And teachers are very comfortable taking seminars about bullying and learning everything about the bully-victim relationship. However, this type of research is based mostly on psychological models and perspectives that reduce the phenomenon as a conflict between two individuals or the propensity of individuals to become either one or the other, and ignore larger societal structures. For example, bullying experienced by boys is usually homophobic bullying, whereas girls experience what we call slut-shaming, the situation where girls and women are attacked verbally or physically because they are perceived as having violated anything from dress codes to sexual norms and even perceived as being responsible for their own rape. There's also bullying that is fueled by Islamophobia, xenophobia, and racial intolerance. Schools are also places of pervasive sexual harassment, a term that has been wrongly associated only with the workplace setting. All of these phenomena can interact at any time and result in different forms of violence that students experience. Students from minority backgrounds can be especially vulnerable to these forms of violence, and they're even more likely to be unaware of how the law could protect them. Finally, I should explain that all of these critiques are purely theoretical when it comes to understanding the Greek Cypriot educational system, which has so far failed to promote a comprehensive approach to multicultural education, even though the number of other language students, that's how they call it, alloglossy, in elementary schools today is around 14% of the total student population. For example, the 2014 annual report of the Ministry of Education and Culture devotes a total of 2 pages out of 400 for intercultural education, which are mostly taken up by statistics of these other language speakers in Greek Cypriot elementary schools. And the main goal is really very simplistic. They talk about interaction of the cultures and exchange of elements. And it's really recycling ideas about interculturalism and multiculturalism from the 1980s at best. And the problem for this is the fact that multiculturalism arrived in the Greek Cypriot educational system really very late, at the turn of the 21st century, when we actually realized that there are actually a lot of migrant students in our schools. And this came after decades of promoting the national goal of I don't forget and I struggle, which refers to the division of the island. This means that teachers were forced to offer conflicting messages. On the one hand, talk about the occupied areas, the desire for return, and the memory of those barbarian Turks who took away our land, while on the other hand, promote the idea of respect for other cultures. The educational system had painted the world in terms of Greek versus Turk, and now teachers had also to talk about black and white and brown and all those other differences. In the meantime, the ghettoization of minority students in specific schools and the lack of meaningful statistics for the educational success and progress have created a vacuum for understanding, in our understanding of the main problems faced by minority students. So it seems that the educational system itself may be the problem and not the solution. And I would like to present really quickly, we don't really have time, right? Okay. Just to give you an idea of the Learning Communities Project. This is a project that started off with a research center at the University of Barcelona called KREA. It started off in the 1970s, really based on the work of Freire and Habermas. Freire was a friend of many researchers at KREA. And it's based on the idea of implementing these successful educational actions. There's just too many information to give out, but I want to give you an example of a school where this has been implemented. The whole idea around learning communities is the fact that you bring the community into the school, and you use all these parents and community members that you think are the problem. Oh, they're not interested, they're not coming to the school, they don't care about their kids' education. You bring them in, and they are the support for the success of the students. One of the schools that they studied is this school in Albacete in Spain, where the situation was so bad in terms of absenteeism. The teachers really asked for protection from the police to enter the school because there was so much crime in the area, and especially around the school. There was conflict between the families and the teachers, and very, very low academic performance. And only a few years implementing the project, they actually have real hard data in terms of how the students listening, speaking, talking, reading, writing improved because of the implementation of the learning communities model. And these had expanded into other areas of life, such as employment, health, housing, and civic participation. And now the authorities did not dare to go to school initially, but now they want to go into the school and find out how did they do it, how can this be a model. We're actually implementing, and this is an example of how researchers, representatives of Roma associations, representatives of other charity organizations, education inspectors come together to talk about the school. There is a research project that we're implementing right now. It's again an Erasmus project, 2-year Erasmus project that we're implementing in a school in Limassol, and we're trying to get the Ministry of Education to become interested in this learning communities model, because I should add, it's done without any additional resources. It doesn't cost the ministry anything. But you close down the school and you bring the community and you start dreaming about what you want the school to be. You don't start bitching about, oh, this is the problem, and we don't have air conditioning, we don't have heating, we don't have this, and we don't have that. You start with dreaming, and then you realize that all the parents, the teachers, and the students, they all want the same thing. They want good education. So I will finish off with, I want to return to the quote I started with, because I think it summarizes a very pervasive sentiment these days. Fear at a time of economic crisis, of national crisis, and limited resources, and the idea that there is no place for solidarity, something that Theo has also emphasized. And I like what Elizabeth Martinez called this, which is the oppression Olympics, the situation whereby groups compete for the mantle of being most oppressed to gain attention and political support of dominant groups, such as they pursue policy remedies, leaving the overall system of certification unchanged. And I think that this is not only a futile fight, this oppression Olympics, but it's also a dangerous one that risks leaving the most vulnerable ever more exposed. Thank you very much.